A comic book that shouldn't be all that significant has been put in the spotlight because the creator has called anyone who does not like Alan Scott, the Green Lantern #1, a hater, a queerphobe. You are on the wrong side of history, and you're clearly CG if you do not support this comic book. And we've all seen the preview pages that they decided to put out there with J. Edgar Hoover and Alan Scott and this other character, something lad. I don't remember the guy's name, but his boyfriend when he was in the army. And I'm going to review Alan Scott, the Green Lantern #1. I'm going to throw the first stuff out of the window. I was like, you know what? Everyone's already seen the preview pages. We already did a video about it. We'll talk about the story, whatever it is, on the merits of what it is. But you can't actually do that because this literally is a story about Alan Scott being gay and being a victim of his circumstance and ages. This actually isn't an original idea from Tim Sheridan or DC Comics or anyone associated with this comic book. They've actually went and stolen Mark Millar's idea, but Mark Millar was smart enough to realize this probably doesn't work for an in-continuity character that's been established for 80 years, but it is a story worth telling. And if you go and read it there, I think a lot of people would enjoy it. And that's really the big failing of Alan Scott, the Green Lantern #1, because it basically just takes for granted any history associated with Alan Scott, the JSA, or the DC Comics universe, and it just kind of throws it under the bus time and time again. Everything about this story is taken from the lens of Alan Scott being a gay man, in the 1930s, in the 1940s or whatever, at World War II era. And I'm not going to sit there and pretend that America was just really open-armed to gay men at the time. It certainly wasn't. But it doesn't really fit the story for Alan Scott. It never really has. And this is why this entire story falls apart. Every single relationship defined within this, whether it's with the taxi driver that's kind of his sidekick for like a decade, whether it's with the JSA, whether it's with the army themselves, whether it's with his relationship with the Green Lantern powers, is all basically focused in on the fact that he's a gay man, because he's not allowed to be the Green Lantern Alan Scott. He's not allowed to be a superhero anymore. He's got to be gay victim superhero, and it's all gay victim up front. Of course, you saw the J. Edgar Hoover stuff where he was basically being used and abused, and it certainly insinuated that he wanted to put his army combat boots on for a little romp. And so let's get into this comic book. I will admit the art from Cian Tormey looks perfectly fine. I wouldn't call it spectacular, but it's all right. Like I said, we're going to skip the first few pages, and it's all about the Crimson Flame. If you've read the original Golden Age Green Lantern stories, Alan Scott was a train engineer. He was working on a train. He discovered the Green Flame, and that is basically where his powers came from. He wasn't a scientist or anything like that. He worked on a train. There was a sabotage, and he ended up discovering this power and basically using it for good to provide justice throughout the universe. But now he actually is an engineer for the Army Corps of Engineers during World War II, and he is searching out for the Crimson Flame. He, it turns out, is no longer motivated to actually help people. This is the motivation of the character from the notes or the diary of Alan Scott himself, according to Tim Sheridan. It's hard to say what I was doing on that ship was for anyone's good but my own. Mine and Johnny's, Johnny being, I guess, Johnny Ladd. That's the guy he's in love with. The idea was to write our ticket out of the Army. To them, the Crimson Flame was a valuable weapon. To me, it was a doctoral fellowship and a book or three, just enough to keep the lights on as we tucked ourselves away in the middle of some blissful nowhere, a future, because he wants to discover the Crimson Flame, give it to the Army so they can murder basically millions of people using it. So he and Johnny Ladd can actually go and move to Montana, have a ranch or something after he writes a couple of books, and they can just be by themselves. And it's certainly heavily insinuated they want to get married, because this story really is only about Alan Scott's undying love for Johnny Ladd, not his undying love for justice, not his want to go out there and help people. In fact, this case, he wants to harness a weapon that can do a ton of bad, almost like a nuclear weapon, to produce as many casualties on the battlefield as possible to end the war and offer him an opportunity as apparently some type of underground married couple. Things do not go well. And this story jumps around 3 time frames. I guess this is before Green Lantern days. That's the way I take it. Then it jumps to the J. Edgar Hoover stuff, which I believe is afterwards, and he is the Green Lantern. And then it jumps into the future where he actually, I believe, is working alongside the JSA very reluctantly. But we're going to stick with the boat, and we're going to stick with the timelines to make this story make a little bit more sense, because in a lot of cases it doesn't. And it turns out the Crimson Flame is not quite what they thought it was. He had created this device that would attract the Crimson Flame because that's what it wanted to do. It wanted to be protected in some type of vessel. Why he believes this, I don't know. But it turns out the Crimson Flame itself is also homophobic. They are actually able to take in a lot of the Crimson Flame energy. It starts destroying the ship. He has to unload it and save everybody. At least that's what they think is happening. And while the Crimson Flame is taking over the ship, he can tell it's only coming for Alan Scott and Johnny Ladd because, like I said, the Crimson Flame itself is also a representation of the homophobic elements of the time. They only go after him, and it takes his true love away from him. And that is a day that will haunt him forever, but it won't haunt him too long because this absolutely plays into later aspects. I believe this will lead to the Crimson Lantern or whatever stupid thing that Jeff Johns just introduced to DC Comics not too long ago, which is sure to be ruined by Tim Sheridan and his not very good writing. We move up to 1941, and Alan Scott is a troubled man. I believe he's getting out the army at this time. He's being heavily pressured by J. Edgar Hoover to actually be like the face, I guess, of the JSA, because the JSA are no longer like the Mystery Men, a team of mystery heroes that realize they need to protect their anonymity and all that type of stuff to be able to help people, basically separate from the government. Although at one point, if I remember correctly in All-Star Comics, they do become some type of like pseudo arm of the DOD during the war. They never really worked for J. Edgar Hoover or any like federal bureaucracy until now, because Tim Sheridan needs that to happen, because they are no longer a team of mystery men superheroes that are basically the inspiration for all of our modern superheroes. That's not good enough. They need to be an agent of propaganda for the United States government during the war effort and all that stuff. Because Tim Sheridan doesn't actually like DC Comics. He certainly doesn't like Golden Age DC Comics. He doesn't like Alan Scott, and he certainly doesn't like the Justice Society of America. And the way he frames him here, you can see why Mark Millar might have that idea for Jupiter's Circle, but realize it's not right for JSA. Kind of like Superman Red Sun, to where, yeah, that's an interesting concept. That's a story that might need to be told, but it actually can't be part of canon and continuity. But DC Comics doesn't really care about their own universe anymore. So they're having this conversation, and you tell me he's blackmailing you. Wow, I mean, he was already famous, Al, but this is a famous on a whole nother level. And all he wants is for you to smash up a few goons with the Justice Club, Justice Society. And that's not all he wants, but it's enough. So what? Who cares? You spend a day with Dr. Helmet, the ghost guy, and Zippy the fastball, or what have you, and bingo bango, the feds is off your case. I say do it. You know I can't, on account of who you fool around with. That ain't none of their business. You're a hero. Maybe in the light, but after dark, the world and its laws being what they are, the hard truth is I'm a criminal. Don't say that. It ain't like you're some kind of delinquent. I knowingly and repeatedly commit felonious acts with other men that, whoa, hey, I don't want to judge you. I don't need the details on what yous all do with your felonies, and neither does the JSA. The last time I was on a team, people got hurt. So the JSA would never accept him because he's a gay man, and obviously they would have to throw him in jail or whatever, even though part of being a member of the JSA is being completely anonymous. You're not actually supposed to be friends. You don't really know much about each other other than your superhero personas and your superhero exploits. I believe the first time the JSA ever got together was them telling stories about what they have accomplished as superheroes. But it's Tim Sheridan, and this is the new DC Comics, and the JSA are a bunch of homophobes. And they would never accept him like old Derby here because they're a much less enlightened person than some taxi driver from New York or whatever. And as I said, like every relationship, every plot element, every story element of this comic book is about Alan Scott being gay. It's not really about him being a hero. It's not about him being even Alan Scott. It's about him being gay man Alan Scott. And then Alan Scott is made aware of a hostage situation that's going on near him. He shows up and everyone's like, hey, what are you doing here so fast? He's like, I've been gone for 2 hours. I'm like, hours? That doesn't make sense. We literally just watched you stop the guy that held these people hostage, on the roof, and you took off. You took him off to the pier or whatever. And all of a sudden he's realizing there's somebody out there that's pretending to be me. Apparently they look just like him. And he says, they're obviously mistaken. The police officer says it's hard to mistake you. Also, the loon with the gun was only wearing shorts and combat boots. So apparently the Crimson Flame, which has probably become the Crimson Lantern by this point, is also framing Alan Scott for being gay. And he's produced a version of his ex-boyfriend that he thought died because of the Crimson Flame in boxer shorts and combat boots, just like the photos that J. Edgar Hoover had. So it's not only J. Edgar Hoover that is using this information against him, it's actually the Crimson Flame physically manifested, I believe, by the Crimson Lantern himself, that is also using this information against Alan Scott, the Green Lantern. And he does discover his true love, his first love in his entire life, on the roof, and he brings him down. And then I believe it's Jay Garrick that says, hey, he drowned and he's burnt. That's really weird. And following all this, something really strange happens. We just jump to a last page. We don't know where this comes from. It's just there. We know what it means. You know what it means. I know what it means. Alan Scott, Green Lantern, is going through conversion therapy for being gay. According to the story, he's never actually told anybody. That's why he won't work with the JSA. I guess maybe when he sees his long-lost love drowned and burnt in front of him, that apparently committed a crime and was defeated by a Green Lantern that wasn't him but looked strikingly like him, maybe he fell on the ground and admitted everything. I'm not really sure, but obviously this is alluding to some of the more disgusting things in our more recent history with conversion therapy, chemical castration, and things of that nature happening to gay men back in the day. And I'm not going to sit there and act like this never happened or this was right or anything like that. So I understand where this is coming from, but I also understand why it doesn't really work for Alan Scott, Green Lantern, the JSA, or really the DC Comics universe. And the fact that it's written by Tim Sheridan certainly doesn't help. This isn't quite as bad. Well, actually nearly as bad, because Teen Titans Academy is almost unreadable. It's just terrible. You could tell that Tim Sheridan, there was nothing inside Tim Sheridan that wanted to tell a Teen Titans Academy story. There was nothing about Tim Sheridan that wanted to tell a Red X story or whatsoever. He just wanted to introduce new gay characters to the DC Comics universe. And this is allowing him to do that. He gets to tell a story about a gay superhero that's only about him being gay. So this is more in Tim Sheridan's wheelhouse as a comic book writer, but it's not really a superhero story. There's maybe 2 or 3 pages of action. You don't really see the Green Lantern do almost anything. And he certainly doesn't sound very heroic when he says, I was doing everything for Johnny and me. It was all about us. I never actually wanted to help anybody. You know, I only wanted to help destroy people so that we could get our opportunity to go out and be happy together or whatever. So this isn't the worst thing he's written. It's probably even better than his Shazam story, but these are such low bars. Like, those are really, really, really bad comic books. I would say Teen Titans Academy is on the level of maybe like a Hawk. Well, Hawk Girl's really probably the bottom level, but like a Tim Drake Robin, it's probably on that level. And this is a little bit better than that, but it ain't much better. You know, and I saw that they decided to go out there and like do the review fluffs, where all the sites decide to come out in unison on the first day and declare this is a 10-star comic book. It's perfect in every single way. That is not the case. I think if you're a DC Comics fan, if you're an Alan Scott fan, if you're a Green Lantern fan, which are really the only people that are going to be interested in a book like this, unless you fell under Tim Sheridan trying to emotionally manipulate you, I think you are going to be disappointed. If you're a JSA fan, I think you will be disappointed. Just the way that they're characterizing and framing those heroes. So I would say this is a failed opportunity that wastes some pretty good art. But this is kind of par for the course for DC Comics, and probably a bit of a step up for Tim Sheridan personally as a comic book writer. He almost has zero talent whatsoever. There's almost a coherent story here that sort of works out in the end, but it has nothing to do with superheroics. It only has to do with the sexuality of the character, which is what he would like to be writing anyway. Maybe he can write gay coming-of-age stories or LGBTQ romance stories and stop throwing superheroes in there, because that is obviously not his forte and something he's not really interested in. Now, we talked about Tim Sheridan wanting to emotionally manipulate people into buying this book, because obviously it's a hard sell as it is. Golden Age character, Alan Scott character. Now it's the gay Alan Scott story, because DC was courting controversy. And I kind of broke it all down right here and all the mistakes Tim Sheridan was making at the time. And I stand by this one 100%. There's also a link in the video description.